Hi, Brian. In your latest column in the Atlantic Council, you wrote that Russian military buildup in Belarus could be a long-term policy of militarization of Belarus that could be permanent. The immediate goal of Russian military buildup in Belarus now is to encircle Ukraine from all sides. And if Moscow decides to attack Ukraine, it could invade also from Belarus. But apparently that is not the only goal here. Please explain.
Yeah, I mean, the immediate concern, of course, is Ukraine, because the 30,000 Russian troops that are surged into Ukraine and taken up positions along the Ukrainian border, they could reach Kyiv in a couple hours. The troops invading from the east would have to cross all of eastern Ukraine, cross the Dnieper River. So yeah, the troops in Belarus are certainly relevant for the for a potential invasion of Ukraine. It's something we should be keeping an eye on. But no matter how the Ukraine crisis ends up being resolved, whether Russia invades or not, something's happened right under our noses, Harry, and that's basically that Russia has completed what I call a soft annexation of Belarus. No matter how this conflict ends, Belarus is going to be an effective extension of Russia's Western military district, bringing Russian power right up to the borders of NATO members, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland. And these countries are extremely concerned about this. They want more NATO troops, more U.S. troops, because this really changes the security equation. This is, I don't think this is hyperbole to say that this is the most significant change in the security equation on NATO's eastern flank since the end of the Cold War. Belarus previously had played the role of a buffer state here. Now it doesn't do that anymore.
Russia will say that permanent deployment of its forces in Belarus is an answer to NATO's plan to enlarge towards east, to include new members, include Ukraine and Georgia. It is building up strong defenses against possible NATO invasion. This is the rationale that they will, explain.
I think they would find another rationale if that wasn't happening. I think it's always been Putin's strategic goal to put as much of the old empire back together again. And the highest priorities from Moscow's perspective are Ukraine and Belarus. This is this obsession that Russia has and that Putin has with so-called strategic depth. Strategic depth is just a polite way of saying we want obedient client states on our western border. So that's another thing. And there's another thing to bear in mind here, Harry. This year, 2022, marks the 100th anniversary of the establishment of the Soviet Union in 1922. The treaty was signed, the so-called treaty was signed in Moscow in December of 1922, and it incorporated the Russian Republic, Ukraine, Belarus, and what was then called the Transcaucasian Republic, which of course is Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia. So I think Putin is very, very conscious of anniversaries. He's very conscious of symbolism. And I think he really would like to put some of the old empire back together again, certainly Ukraine and Belarus. So this is what concerns me, and the permanent troop buildup. This has been going on for a while, and I've been tracking this in my column for the Atlantic Council for a long time. Even before the Ukrainian crisis started, Russia and Belarus were conducting almost like constant military exercises. And the constant rotation of troops through Belarus meant that there was already a de facto permanent Russian troop presence in Belarus. Beyond that, Russia and Belarus are building or setting up a so-called joint military training center in Hrodna, in western Belarus, right near the border with Lithuania and Poland. Now, a joint military training center is a very polite way of saying a military base, of course. So that this is another cause for concern. And there's a strong possibility that Lukashenko is going to finally give in on Putin's demand to put an air base in eastern Belarus. So, I mean, this is the train's left the station here pretty much. Belarus is pretty much annexed. I mean, I really see Belarus at the moment as a sovereign state in name only. Putin has effectively expanded Russia's military footprint, economic footprint, and political footprint there. And this is a very disturbing development for the NATO allies on the eastern flank.
One more question about Lukashenko's comments last week when he said that Armenia should join the Union state with Russia and Belarus. He said that no one cares about Armenia and that Pashinyan knows it. that he learned this during the war with Azerbaijan, and nobody really came to rescue Armenia, and that at least Russians came and stopped the attack of Azeri troops. And now Armenia has no other choice. It should join the Union State, Lukashenko said. The statement was condemned in Armenia, but former President Kocharian, who is the leader of the largest opposition faction in the parliament, he is not in the parliament, but he is the leader, also said that Armenia should join the Union State. And he said that that's the only way Armenia can strengthen its position in the region. What are you going to say? Does this worry you?
Well, I mean, what Armenia does is up to Armenia, and it's not up to Lukashenko. Right? That's the first thing I would say. And I don't. When I was watching the conflict with Azerbaijan into a Turkey over Nagorno-Karabakh, what struck me was how little assistance Russia had given to Armenia. I mean, the basis of Armenian-Russian relations is that Russia is going to provide for Armenia's defense. Well, Russia didn't do a very good job of providing for Armenia's defense in that situation. And I was wondering at the time if Armenians were going to begin to question the rationale of the relationship with Russia if Russia doesn't give the one thing it's supposed to give Armenia is to protect it. And it was really unable to protect it in this situation. So I take away a very different interpretation of what happened in that conflict. But at the end of the day, it's not up to Lukashenko to decide what Armenia should or should not do. It's up to Armenia to decide what Armenia should and shouldn't do. Every Russian empire begins with Ukraine and Belarus, but no Russian empire ends with Ukraine and Belarus. So right now the attention is there, but you're seeing disturbing developments like in Georgia. You're seeing very disturbing developments with the ruling Georgian Dream Coalition, which is it still makes nice noises about being pro-Western, but their behavior is certainly not. It's certainly more in line with Russia's priorities. Armenia is in a tough spot due to the conflict with Azerbaijan being kind of hostage to defense assistance from Russia, and that puts Armenia in a really tough spot right now. So I mean, I could see a similar thing happening down the road. My great hope is that just like Ukraine and other countries in the former Soviet space, Armenia has changed over the last 30 years. An entire generation has grown up in an independent country. And I think Putin is kind of living in the past in a lot of ways. I think he's going to be in for a real rude awakening in Ukraine, because that country has changed just dramatically. It's unrecognizable from what it was at the time of the breakup of the Soviet Union. And I suspect a similar dynamic is going on in Armenia. So I think Putin is underestimating how difficult it's going to be to put the empire back together again. But I'll tell you, Harry, I'm reading the Russian press every day, and I've never seen more articles about rebuilding the Soviet Union and what form it should take. Not if you should rebuild the Soviet Union, but what form a new Soviet Union should take. Some are saying it should just be the Slavic states, Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia. Others are saying, no, we should take the South Caucasus and Kazakhstan as well. This is the nature of the debate. It's not whether to reconstitute the Soviet Union or to attempt to, it's how. And that's disturbing right now.
Brian, I listened to one of your podcasts, The Power Vertical. The last one, I guess, you recalled in your popular Power Vertical podcast, you recalled Putin's speech in the Munich Security Conference 15 years ago, where he condemned NATO enlargement, called for a new security order in Europe. Can you tell us what is the significance of that speech? That was sort of like manifesto.
Yeah, that was Putin's manifesto. That was basically, I mean, we didn't really see it at the time because our attention was elsewhere. But that speech 15 years ago, if you go, I went back and listened to it, and it's remarkable. I mean, that Putin has consistently tried to achieve those goals, to change the security order in Europe. And right now we're on the cusp of a serious change in the security order in Europe right now. I mean, NATO is going to continue, of course. That's not going to change, and NATO is not going to change its open door policy. Every democratic European state that qualifies militarily, NATO has an open door that they can apply for membership, and that's not going to change. But what is going to change, I believe, regardless of how this Ukraine situation plays out, is that the era of this romantic globalization is over. From the end of the Cold War, we had been operating under this assumption that if we integrate Russia into the global economy and into Western institutions, into things like the G7 and the WTO, then Russia would change its behavior and will become a more responsible player. They have no intention of doing that. They never had any intention of doing that. And so what we're moving toward now is a divided Europe. The question is just, where is the dividing line going to be? Where you're going to have democratic Europe to the west and this autocratic, authoritarian, kleptocratic, Russian-led bloc to the east. And the question is, where are the lines going to be drawn? And this is a lot of what's being, this is the subtext of the entire Ukrainian crisis, is where I would prefer the line would be drawn is along Ukraine's western border, right, with Ukraine safely and securely in the west. But it's entirely possible, depending on what happens in the next month or so, that it could be drawn on Ukraine's western border, and Ukraine could again become a captive nation. None of us want to see that happen. That would be a tragedy for the Ukrainian people. And the other possibility is it could be right down the Dnieper River, and Russia could partition Ukraine. That's another possibility. So I think we're moving into something different now than we have been living with for an entire generation. And so in Putin's Munich speech was the manifesto, which he announced. It's not like he hid what he was doing. He announced where he wanted to take this. We didn't take it seriously at the time. And again, all of Putin's demands are non-starters. They're absolutely non-starters. But he's going to try to achieve this goal one way or another. And again, whatever happens in Ukraine, he's basically got Belarus now.
Now let's talk about Biden administration's performance during the standoff with the Kremlin. Do you think they are doing enough to prevent the invasion? I've been following analysis and there is one consensus that the Biden administration is deliberately making public sensitive intelligence reports about Russian military movements build up, trying to prevent the surprise element of possible invasion, possible attack. What's your assessment?
No, I would agree with that, Harry. I mean, I actually think the Biden administration is doing quite well with a very bad hand. They're playing a very bad hand very well in this situation. You noted the policy of maximum disclosure. Basically, we were really quickly declassifying intelligence and quickly making that intelligence public once it's been verified. I think the President Biden has learned from the mistakes of the Obama administration during the Russian annexation of Crimea and the intervention in the Donbass back in 2014. And I think they're really turning the information offensive right back on Putin. But unlike Putin, they're using true things and not fake things, right? So they're not just publicizing intelligence on troop movements. They're also publishing intelligence on things like how Russia plans to create a pretext for an invasion, right? Yeah. You know that they delivered this document to the United Nations this week with the so-called atrocities by Ukrainians against Russians in the Donbass, which is kind of strange because Russia occupies the Donbass, so I don't know how Ukrainians can be committing atrocities against Russians there. But they've never let the facts get in the way of a good narrative. But what the Biden administration is doing is publicizing things like this. There were plans to create a fake video with actors and fake corpses of some so-called massacre the Ukrainians or atrocity the Ukrainians committed against ethnic Russians or Russian speakers. And by exposing this, the Biden administration made a situation where Putin couldn't do that, right? Mm-hmm. When they say that Russia's going to invade this week, that guarantees one thing: Russia's not going to invade this week, as Putin's not going to do what Biden predicted they were going to do. So I think, really, I really think that that Biden's kind of getting inside of Putin's head and kind of scrambling his plans. Whether this stops an invasion, we don't know. But it's been I think the administration has done quite well here. They've learned the mistakes of the past, and they're doing much better than they were doing than the Obama administration did back in 2014. Also telegraphing exactly what sanctions that we're gonna impose. This is also different. This is new. We really kept it very vague when we were threatening sanctions in the past, and now we're talking about very specific things like putting major Russian banks on the Treasury Department's SDN sanctions list, or SWIFT bans, or Nord Stream 2, shutting down Nord Stream 2, export restrictions. They're talking about really tough sanctions, and they're telegraphing them in advance. So I think that the administration is doing everything it possibly could do right now.
Okay, Brian, thank you very much. It was really, really interesting. Thank you.